be looking into The Sixth Sense. Um, this film, I think, has been fairly recognized as probably M. Night Shyamalan's best film. And I also don't like to dwindle on the negative of just one particular director. I mean, he has made some impressive works with some interesting ideas, although I think those ideas ended up being misguided as his career went on. I still will hold that The Sixth Sense holds up as one of those well recognized as well as very interesting approaches to a what we would call a thriller. Um, Now, basically, this film is designed to sort of be supernatural, but at the same time, it's really not as how would you say typical of what we would see from a supernatural thriller, in the sense that there is really no villain throughout, and it's really just designed to be this take on what it would be like for someone to really actually see dead people or people that no longer are alive. But in case you haven't heard of, besides the iconic line, "I see dead people," that has been used over and over again, this film centers around a little boy, played by Haley Joel Osment, and his name is Cole, and he apparently has the ability to see, like in the iconic line, dead people. And this is rather interesting. It has some interesting ways of approaching in the way in which he sees dead people. So, the only one who can see them, he can hear them, he can communicate with them too. So it seems like he is sort of like the portal between sort of the dead and the living. And basically, he suffers a lot of, anxiety and pressure from holding that part of his life sort of secret, because, I mean, it's self-explanatory that if you were able to see dead people, you probably wouldn't want people to know about it because they would think you were crazy. And so he's labeled as sort of an outsider, like you see how the other kids are pretty mean to him. And basically, this results in the mom deciding to get him a child psychiatrist to sort of look at him and see what his issues are. And this psychiatrist's name is, I believe, Dr. Malcolm Crowe, who is played by none other than Bruce Willis. And what I do like about this movie is that it really, at the center and the forefront of this movie, is the relationship between Cole and the psychiatrist. You do see these two characters bonding and sort of developing a sort of relationship. And I guess you could say Bruce Willis's character kind of takes on the father role figure, because, as you'll see within the film, Haley Joel Osment's father, father and mother are separated, so we never see the father in the film. So I guess we just assume that he just walked out. And it's also kind of mentioned too, and sort of hinted at within the film, that Cole doesn't really, I don't think, see his dad. So Bruce Willis seems to replace that father figure role fairly well. And I also like too how Cole sort of develops sort of a way in which to cope with the condition that he has, and his ability that he has, and he sort of uses it for good. And you can tell that he sort of ends up sort of developing a connection with people who are passed on and are gone. And you'll even see how he sort of shares this with his mom eventually, because the grandmother passed away, and he's able to see the grandmother come in once in a while. So his abilities are in the real world would be really fascinating. But it really takes on this very interesting approach. Because again, there is no villain, there's no, you know, government or something trying to go after, um, you know, the boy, um, there's really nothing in the sense of what we would consider an ordinary plot as far as villain and protagonist dynamics go. But as far as a thriller is concerned, it does give you chills at some point. Is it a little slow in its direction? Yeah, but that's usually how Shyamalan productions work. And as far as slow goes, this is, I think, a good kind of slow, because you see the tension and you see the characters just kind of breathing and having moments, and then that ultimately leads to certain uh, elements that end up happening within the plot. And you do feel the sort of turmoil that Cole kind of goes through with having this kind of ability. Um, because although it is a gift, it's also like, a curse too. So there's that dynamic that they put in there too, and I think that suits the film really well. Now, the ultimate twist doesn't necessarily, I think, surprise me all that much. But at the same time, it's still a well done and well executed twist, nonetheless, that they sort of have as the plot progresses, which I don't want to give away in case anybody hasn't seen it. But there is this emphasis within the film uh, how 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 there is this bizarre sort of nature to it, and creepiness into sort of the abilities that um, Cole has. But as as far as Shyamalan films go, you can kind of tell that this is his kind of work. Um, but the interesting thing is it's executed in such a um, productive and ultimately positive way that I think it really reflects onto something um, that I think ultimately works for the film that it's trying to be. Um, and it's nice and refreshing to see these kinds of films, because usually we don't see, oftentimes within horror films, there's usually a grandiose evil guy. But I like how here, the ghosts, they're not really bad people. They're just people who've passed on. It's just that sometimes the experiences in which um, Cole uh, has with them, it's sometimes frightening and maybe overwhelming, um, because they kind of do sort of intend to be haunting. But at the same time, they resemble some kind of you know means of contact and means of ultimate expression of you know of and sort of represent uh, who they were when they were alive, so to speak. For example, the grandmother who comes sometimes. So even though we don't really spend too much time with, I don't, I believe we don't even see the grandma, but he mentions her. So um, there is this dark and sinister nature to the ghosts or dead people, and then there's also the light-hearted and really kind of more pleasant um, experiences that he has with the dead. So it's not necessarily a horror film or really so much a thriller as it is a sort of a kind of look into life in the interpretation of someone who can actually be the barrier between life and death. And I think that's something that's just very interesting, and not a whole lot of films have really touched on this concept, or or have addressed it in this way. And I wouldn't be surprised if other films, other television shows have taken sort of some inspiration from this particular film in regards to, ghosts, spirits, and, being able to see the dead and things like that. Um, but I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film with really not giving anything much away. But I think it definitely holds up. I mean, this is one of the more serious roles that I've ever seen Bruce Willis in. So I guess that's also something that makes it stand out as well. And it's one that I think a lot of people recognize and remember. Um, and I think it was also the film really that launched Shyamalan's career, so it has that going for it as well. So I think that's another important thing to note. And eventually he made Unbreakable, which I still thought was a good Shyamalan production ultimately. And it'd be nice if he could return to this kind of form. Um, but I don't know if the boat has sailed on that. But you never know. Maybe he'll come back and make something that's a little bit more close to what his original works were trying to kind of say. And I think he does try to put in interesting concepts, especially later on within his films. It's just they're not seen fully through and culminate as well as the first two films that he was in charge of making. So, yeah, I think that's really, though, ultimately all I can say. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.